Good morning. Hey, if you are newer with us and you're unsure of where we're going to be starting today we are continuing our study that we've been doing for the past handful of weeks through the letters of John, the books of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Now, last week we finished up 1st John, and today we're going to get into the book of 2nd John. Now, as we dive into it, you may have kind of thought this or noticed it as we studied 1st John. 1st John doesn't read very much like a letter. It kind of reads and sounds more like a sermon. However, the books of 2nd and 3rd John, they sound more like letters, kind of the typical letter that you'd find or that you'd read in biblical times, more similar to like the letters from Paul and so forth. And so generally how these letters would work is they would be written by the writer, they would be sent, and they would typically be read in front of the church community, either by the person delivering it or by someone within that church. And so for this week and for next week, since we're dealing with two fairly short letters, but letters that do sound a little bit more like the typical letter that we would see elsewhere in the Bible, I thought it would be nice for someone to come and read these letters before us as a church. So this morning I have invited Pat Crosswhite and asked her if she would come and just read this letter to us as a church as we begin to look at it and study it a little bit deeper this morning. So would you please welcome up Pat?
Good morning. This is 2nd John. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you would walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, and those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. I think it's helpful. I think there's multiple helpful ways to study Scripture, and I think one of them is like we do on a typical Sunday in kind of looking at it section by section or verse by verse. But I think it's also helpful to just read Scripture in just chunks at a time. Granted, these two letters of this week and next week are smaller chunks, but it's helpful just to read the whole thing at a time, and then we can dig further into it. Now, as we get into this letter, I think you may have noticed, and you may not have, but there are some parts of this letter that are a little strange. They're a little strange, and it almost seems as if John is teaching a message of like anti-hospitality. I don't know if you caught that, where he talked about don't welcome people into your home, don't greet them, and so forth. And in fact, as I was preparing for this, I read this in a commentary, and I thought it was really interesting, just kind of as a way to look at this. This commentator that I read, he spent some time talking about how 2nd John in these commentaries generally have like very little bit dedicated to them. Most of it's 1st John, and a little bit for 2nd John. He spent some time talking about how 2nd John has nothing new to offer that 1st John hasn't already said, and said better. He talks about how 2nd John is rarely preached on, rarely taught on, doesn't appear in any cycle of the common lectionary. It wasn't taught on by Martin Luther or John Calvin, who famously taught on 1st John. And then he says this, and this is a quote from it. He says, "Perhaps the unique feature of this letter is best left unheeded, namely the warning to not show hospitality or even friendliness to those who espouse false doctrine and do not walk in love. Shunning may still be a practice by the Amish, but it is not in good odor in modern society or modern churches. To be inhospitable and unfriendly is bad form. Incivility neither has nor needs defenders. In the face of it, normal human relations suffer. There is a sufficiency of bigotry and intolerance about, so that we do not need the second epistle to encourage it." Now, I found that very interesting because, now, he does say positive things about the letter too. That's not the entire entry. But I found that very interesting as a way to look at this letter as something that someone who studied it and spent some of their academic time in it actually says, maybe don't preach on this. And so I think that there's some things he says that are true. That I absolutely agree with the statement that there's enough bigotry and intolerance and that there's no need to add to it. But I think we need to question, is that what John is actually intending here? And so let's dig into it and find out. So let's go back to the beginning and let's start reading through it together. 2 John chapter 1, well, 2 John chapter, the only chapter. 2 John verse 1, it says this. "The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ the Father's Son, in truth and love." So right from the beginning, we see the elder. We talked about this at the beginning of 1 John. This is most likely referring to John the disciple. And then he's writing to the elect lady and her children. Now, there are some differing opinions here, but the majority of scholarship seems to generally agree that this is referring to a house church and its congregants. That is not actually likely writing to a specific person, but to a house church in Asia Minor, maybe Ephesus, but a house church and its congregants. And its congregants are the children. And so John starts with this greeting, and he says, "Grace, mercy, and peace be with us in truth and love." Now, if you read Paul's letters, if you read other letters, you may hear a lot of grace and mercy to you, but John says to us. So right off the bat, he is identifying himself with them. He's not saying for you and for me, he's saying for us as a whole. In other words, I am a part of you, and I'm asking for God's grace, mercy, and peace to be with us. And then he continues about talking about truth, this idea of truth and love, which we've been talking about for throughout all of 1 John, this relationship between truth and love. And he continues with a little bit more of this idea in verse 4. "I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new command, but the one we had from the beginning." Same phrasing as 1 John, the command you had from the beginning, that we love one another. "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. And this is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it." So again, we talked about some of your children, talking about people within the congregation. And he's talking about, he wants them to think about the relationship between truth and love that we've been discussing. But the reason he keeps talking about truth is it's important to have this truth in mind because the truth is what's going to keep them away from danger. I think that's the simplest way to put it. When we're talking about false teachers that have gone away from the church, that have come back and are trying to pull others away into these false doctrines about who Jesus is, the truth is what keeps them safe. It's what keeps them away from the danger that comes in embracing these false teachings. You can kind of think of it as like a fence around an area that maybe if you have kids or dogs that they go out and play, there's a fence, so there's a boundary that keeps them safe. Now, when we send them out to play, if I send my dogs out to play, I want them to stay within the fence, not because I don't want them to have fun, it's because I want to keep them away from danger, right? It's a pretty simple concept. It's like our playground out back here. There is a fence around it. And the reason there's a fence around it is because it's right next to the parking lot. And while we want kids to go have fun and play and do all those fun things, we want them to also not wander into the parking lot. You follow me? It's pretty simple because we don't want to, it's not as if we want to restrict their freedom. It's not as if we want to stifle their fun. It's because we care about their safety, and they might not know better than to wander into a parking lot where a car might not see them. And you see, this is what the keeping in truth does for us. In fact, this is what the law of Moses was meant to do, the Old Testament law. And we see this idea in Galatians chapter 3. He says, this is Paul writing, he says, "Now before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law would be our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian, for in Christ Jesus, you are all sons of God through faith." So as you look at the law, the Old Testament law was meant to be kind of a babysitter, or a guardian, or a boundary, or a protector against the dangers of the world. However, once Jesus came and the Spirit descended on believers and indwelt believers, that fence, that boundary, that law was removed. And it's not because it wasn't good in the first place. It's because the Spirit has now given believers the ability to discern and to walk close to God without keeping those laws. It's almost as if the Holy Spirit is giving us the ability to mature. Right? Like I have an 18-month-old. She goes and plays out in there. She needs the fence because she might wander into traffic and she's this tall and you can't see her. Now my 5-year-old, he plays there. The fence is a good idea, but he does know not to run into traffic. Like that's something that he has learned over time. Once he turns 8, once he turns 10, once he turns 15, I don't really need to keep him within a fence to keep him out of traffic. You follow me? Does that make sense? And so this is kind of what the Spirit does for us. It allows us to mature and to recognize the truth, and this is what John is encouraging them to do. But the reality is, even if we stay within those boundary lines, even if the kids stay within that fence, it still matters what they do in it, right? The kids can all stay within the fence, stay within the boundary line, but if they're punching each other, that's a problem. And so this is why John is talking about marrying the idea of truth and love together. You need to stick with the truth. Keep away from danger. Keep away from the dangers that are trying to pull you out of the teachings of Jesus, pull you away from who Jesus is. But in doing so, we also need to love one another, and this is how we walk in the way of Jesus. See, Jesus lived in perfect righteousness, keeping within those boundary lines, and he did so with perfect sacrificial love for those around him. See, it's easy to have one and not the other. In fact, this is the message that we see. If we were to flip our Bibles over a couple pages, this is the message that we see to the letter of the church of Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2. This is Jesus speaking, but as John is writing this letter, he commends them for staying with the truth, for avoiding false teachers, for sticking to the truth. But then he says, but you've abandoned your first love. You've been focused on the truth, which is a really good thing, and you've stuck to what is true, but you've abandoned the love for Christ and for one another. And so this is the message that John is emphasizing in 2 John and all throughout these 3 letters. And then he continues in verse 7. "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teachings of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked ways. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you." So as we work backwards here, the children of your elect sister greet you. This is another indicator that this is John writing to a church and not an individual, because it's unlikely that he'd be saying your niece and nephew say hi, right? So the children of your elect sister, the children of this other house church in the community greet you. And there's a few ideas at work through these verses, but John revisits the dangers of false teachers and the importance of keeping oneself from them. But then he takes it a step further, and he says, you should not even receive them into your house. And again, this sounds like John is teaching this lesson in like anti-hospitality, which is ironic because next week when we look at 3 John, the issue is that there's another house church that is not being hospitable and not welcoming people into their home. And he kind of chastises them and talks about how they need to welcome people into their home. So what's the deal here? What's going on here? Well, like I said, I agree with the commentator's statement that there's enough bigotry and intolerance and that the church doesn't have the greatest history at being on the right side of some of these issues. However, if we are associating John's message here with intolerance and bigotry, I think we're completely missing what John is saying here. See, in ancient times, in biblical times, to invite someone, to welcome someone into your home was a way of saying that you endorse the message that they are bringing. It is not a matter of just putting a roof over their heads. It's not a matter of just sharing a meal. It's saying that I support, I encourage, I endorse the message that this person is bringing. So John is not simply saying, hey, I want them to sleep on the cold, and that's their punishment. He's saying, be careful what you are endorsing. Be careful what you are doing, because bringing them into the community is saying, I support this, and the message that they are supporting is one that is going to tear the church apart from the inside out. And that's what their mission is. These people that have gone away, they're trying to pull people away from the belief, from the teachings of who Jesus was, from the belief of who Jesus was, and trying to pull them out of the church. You see, our context today isn't the same. If you were to welcome someone into your home, if you were to invite someone over, even give them a place to stay, I don't think everyone would assume you agree with every single thing that they're teaching. You're just being hospitable, right? And so our context is a little different. So if we use the letter of 2 John as a way of saying, this is just a way to not be hospitable to each other, I think we're missing the point of what he's saying. However, we still need to be careful about what we are endorsing and what we are giving our attention to when it comes to teachings about Jesus. And you see, I think it's a little bit easier to do, but it's also important that this is something we do on a church level as well. See, we are fortunate enough to have a building, a physical building, and in a admittedly very convenient location to downtown and to a lot of things. And so we get a lot of requests for people to use the building, which is great. And I love, because it is one of my biggest pet peeves, if you will, empty church buildings throughout the week. I don't like that. If we have a building, if God has entrusted us to actually have a physical structure and it can be used for more than just Sunday morning, I think that we are not stewarding what we have well if we let it sit empty for 6 days a week. Now, we have a preschool, so it's really never empty, but we get reached out to by people to use the facility from time to time, and there's a lot of organizations that use our building, which you may not know about. We have a foster care agency that does their classes, all of their classes for this region out of our building. They've run multiple courses, whether licensing and training new foster families. They use our building. We have a church that meets on Sundays at Holly Ridge Middle, I think it is, that they're a portable church, so they don't have a physical space. So early mornings throughout the week, they come and they have Bible studies here because they don't have a place that they can do that. We've had a domestic abuse support group that meets here from time to time. A Christian women's group that meets here from time to time. And I love all of this. I love the fact that we can use our building to do more than what happens here on Sunday mornings. But we have to be careful as the leadership of the church of who uses the building. Not because we don't want to welcome anyone in, but because anything that happens within these walls, people will assume we are in support of. We can be as clear as day and say this is not associated with Lake Springs Church and so forth, but if someone sees a sign, walks in and hears something taught, no matter how many things we try and say, they're going to assume that it is something that we endorse and support. So we have to be careful about what is taught within this building. Now, I will say, in my time here in the past handful of years, I've never gotten a request from something that I was uncomfortable allowing happen in the building. It probably will happen at some point, but it hasn't happened at least to me yet. It may have happened before my time. But it's kind of easy from a church standpoint to avoid that, to be honest, because no one can really walk in and just start a Bible study. We have to give them the codes to get in the building. We have to clean the place. We have to communicate with them, make sure the calendar works. So it's kind of easy to avoid from a church standpoint. But when it comes to an individual, to you and to me, not as the whole church, but as just us in and of ourselves, it can be a little bit harder to avoid that. And it can be a little easier to accidentally endorse, accidentally support, accidentally spend our time in something that teaches something that is in contrast to what Jesus taught. Now, I think it's important before we move on here, before we continue on this, to kind of clarify a little bit, especially if you're newer with us, clarify a little bit about what we're talking about here when we talk about these false teachings. Because what John is not saying here is he's not talking about secondary issues. He's not talking about kind of tertiary issues. He's not talking about differences of preference, differences of opinions about things. He is talking about people that are coming and saying that they do not believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be and are trying to pull others out of the church into that belief. We are talking about salvation issues. And that's not to say that there aren't secondary issues that are very important, that we shouldn't spend our time on, that we shouldn't care about and think about. But John is talking about something that will literally tear the church apart, and it will tear the individual apart, and will lead them to the death that comes with denying Jesus. This is what he is warning about. He is not warning about differences of preference, differences of opinion, and differences and talking about keeping those people away. And so as we talk about what we're thinking about, not just what we're thinking about, but what we're endorsing, I think maybe a more helpful way to put it, since it's hard to kind of think about what do I endorse? I don't really put my name on many things. I think a better question is using the phrasing that John uses, and that's, what am I abiding in? What am I abiding in? Not just where am I spending my time, but where am I, or not just even what am I accidentally endorsing, but what am I receiving life from? See, the reality is not everything that we receive life from is necessarily bad. It just isn't lasting. You may have recently gotten a new job. You may have recently bought a new house. You may have recently gotten married, a new relationship, and feel like you're experiencing life from these things, and these things are not necessarily bad, and they may seem like they are giving you life for a time. But all of those things, while they may be good for the season, good for a time, even a marriage that is good for a lifetime, it is not meant to be what we receive our life from. It is meant to be, as John says in verse 9, that whoever abides in these teachings of Jesus has the Father and the Son. Anything that we try and hinge our life on and receive our life from outside of that will not last, because that's not what it's designed to do. Think about this. I grew up in Michigan, and growing up, my family, we would go every year on vacation to Niagara Falls. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Niagara Falls. I have not been as an adult, but my memory of it is awesome, and it is great. And I know it's very touristy. I know it's a lot of things that are pretty silly, but I just remember loving it. And the falls are awesome and huge, and they have colors on them at night. And you can take tours where you walk behind the falls. It was great. I would love to go back. If anyone wants to go to Niagara Falls, we'll make a church trip out of it. But as you're there you see some displays about this guy. And I actually read about this in a book this past week, and I found it really interesting and applicable to what we're talking about. There's a guy in the 1800s. His name was Charles Blondin. And he became famous for walking along a tightrope over the falls. Now, this is 1800s. So, in other words, there's no safety harness. There's nothing under him. There's no helicopter over him. He would walk along a tightrope from one side to the other across the falls. And he became famous for this. He ended up doing this over 300 times. And people would travel in to see this guy, and he would do crazy stuff. He got to the point where he would go and he would do a somersault on the tightrope over the falls. He would get down and let himself down and hang from one arm over the falls and pull himself up back and walk across. In fact, one of the best things I read is that he, at one point, walked across with some supplies on his back, sat down on the tightrope, pulled out a camping stove, and cooked an omelet. And then Niagara Falls has this boat called the Maid of the Mist that it gives a tour of the falls, and then he lowered it down on a rope to the Maid of the Mist to feed them, and then packed everything up, stood back up, and walked across. It's insane. It's crazy what this guy would do, apparently. And there's pictures of this, and there's record of all this. And so eventually he got to the point where he wanted to try walking across with someone on his back. And all the people that came to see him, that had confidence that he would do what he could do, said no. Nobody would get on this guy's back to walk across, even though they'd seen him do it over and over and over again. And so eventually the only person that he could get to do it was his manager. Probably regretted it that day, but his name was Harry Colcord. And as they're preparing to do this, this is a quote from him, from Charles, from the guy who did the walking, to his manager. cross. He said, "Look up, Harry. You are no longer Colcord. You are Blondin. You are me. Until I clear this place, be a part of me, mind, body, and soul. If I sway, sway with me. Do not attempt to do any balancing yourself. If you do, we will both go to our death." And you see, this is the difference between believing in and believing that. Right? There were a lot of people there that believed that he could do what he claimed to be able to do. But there were not many people there that believed in him enough to have the confidence to put their life on it. And this is what we can very easily do with Jesus. We can believe that Jesus exists. We can even believe that Jesus is the Son of God. We can believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be, but until we believe in, till we abide in his teachings, abide in who he is, we aren't truly receiving life from him and aren't truly putting our lives on him. And this is what it means to abide in him, that you are with him with mind, body, and soul. Last year, we if you don't know, I said we came from Michigan. We've been here almost 10 years now. And growing up, my family, we always would have large gardens at my parents' house, and they still do. Loved planting things, loved growing food, and all that. And so when we moved down south, we wanted to continue that. Brittany, my wife, and I, when we were in Michigan, we had a house that we planted like a quarter of an acre on. It was awesome. We planted rows and rows of things, and every morning we'd go outside, and the deer would just be feasting on it, and it was great. But moving down here, we wanted to grow some things. So at our house, we had some things growing, but it's different in the south than it is up north. And last year, I think if I remember right, Brittany found this at the store. She found that you could get a lemon tree. And let me tell you, growing citrus, that's just like blows my mind. Like the fact that there's still some things about the South that still are like crazy to me. Like I love the fact, and it probably drives some people crazy. Like when I see a lizard walk by, it's just crazy to me that we live in a place that has lizards. To me, it's like Eden. I don't know. Like it's amazing that that's a place that we could be at. But growing citrus, I didn't think we were far enough south for that. And so the fact that that was there, blew me away. So we got this lemon tree. We read about how to do it. You know, it does get too cold in the winter, so there's some things you have to do. Don't put it in the ground and so forth. And so last year, we had it in a pot. It grew, and it produced a lemon. And I couldn't believe it. Like, we grew a lemon. And it was unbelievable. And we made lemonade out of it, and it was so just the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then winter came. And there are ways to make it survive, bring it inside and so forth, but it's like a big pot. We don't really have like space for a big pile of dirt on our counter. And so we just kind of like, we'll roll the dice and see what happens. So we left it outside. It died. This year, it's a stick. It's a stick in the dirt. But the reality is that lemon tree, it bore fruit for a season. It was good. It had life for a season, but it didn't last. And it's not because that lemon tree was abiding in. It wasn't because it was living in something that was necessarily bad. It was in an environment and in something that wasn't meant to give it lasting life. And you see, this is the way that we can be. This is what life can look like if we receive life from something outside of Jesus. It may look good for a time. It may actually feel like we have this fulfillment, this life, this purpose in something for a time, and things might feel really good, but if it is coming from anything outside of Jesus, it will not last. It will not exist for the long haul. It'll eventually let us down because that is not what it is designed to do. But if we are abiding in Jesus, if we are finding his worth and our value in him, that is what will sustain us. That is what will last for us. But the hard part is that abiding is a lifelong pursuit, right? There's no end game. There's no finish line while we're still alive in abiding in Jesus. It is the continual growing closer and closer to him. I don't know if you have anyone in your life that you see as like a giant, and like a really faithful person, not like an author, not like a historical person, but just a person in your life. Like, if I could have the faith of this person, there's no just getting and then coasting. There's no like, if I can get there, then I'll be good for the rest of my life. It is a continual day in and day out being with Jesus, growing closer and closer and closer to him. It is what Eugene Peterson calls long obedience in the same direction. It is just the constant moving closer and closer and closer to Jesus until the day that we meet him face to face. See, this is the message that Moses gives to the Israelites in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, we get this prayer called the Shema that Moses gives to the Israelites, and it's a prayer about abiding in Jesus. But he takes it a step further when he gives it some context. We read this in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He says, "Hear, O Israel." Hear, the Hebrew word Shema means hear, and it doesn't just mean listen to me. It means hear and obey. It means not just listen, but listen and obey this. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Then he continues. He says, "These commandments that I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as a symbol on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames of your houses and on your gates." See, the message is not to love God in word alone. It is to have your love for God be at the forefront of everything that you do. He talks about tie them as a symbol on your hands. That means everything that you do with your hands should be focused on God and focused on loving him with all of your heart, soul, and mind. He says, bind them on your forehead. That means have them in your mind. Every thought you have, every imagination you have should be in an effort to growing closer and closer to the Lord. Because that is the only source of true and lasting life. Yeah, I love the way that the Message paraphrase of Scripture puts Romans 12. This is the way that the Message paraphrases Romans 12, 1 and 2. It says, "So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, your eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit in without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out." See, this is what abiding in Jesus means. It means orienting everything that we do around him. It means everything we do, our sleeping, our eating, our going to work, our walking around life, every facet of who we are, orienting it around who Jesus is in an effort to grow closer to him. And while that may sound burdensome, it's not. It's meant to be freeing to us, because that is the only place that we can truly, really experience life. Life doesn't come from anything that we experience here on earth. It doesn't come from anything that we do physically. It doesn't come from anything that we accomplish. It only comes through Jesus. And we get the opportunity, not the burden, not the command, but we get the opportunity to spend our lives growing closer and closer and closer to him. That long obedience in the same direction, that just focusing on Jesus on the horizon and living my life, taking one step closer to him. In everything I do, in my mind, with my hands, in my thoughts, in my heart, everything I do being filtered through, is this in an effort to grow closer to Jesus.